welcome back to the EdTech Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Hachette Learning Academy. Hachette Learning Academy is a new online platform with 18, soon-to-be 20 interactive courses for teachers and more being published next year. The courses are fully adaptive and grounded in research-informed principles of cognitive development and professional learning. Each course begins with a reflective starting point question, as teachers work through the course, carefully designed questions check their understanding in real time. This responsive model adapts the content journey based on the learner's responses. And when the teacher's understanding is secure, the platform offers challenge or accelerates progression. When their responses suggest uncertainty or gaps in understanding, the course intelligently rephrases or resurfaces key ideas, presents fresh examples, or provides model responses. This supports the shift from conscious effort to confident embedded competence. Each section ends with an optional application and reflection task, encouraging teachers to take ownership of their next steps. And today's episode explores how professional learning is really evolving and how we can better support educators to navigate AI, digital wellbeing, and the foundational skills that students need to thrive. All courses that are part of the new Hachette Learning Academy. Across these three conversations, we look at professional development not as a one-off event, but as something that is flexible, relevant, and grounded in real challenges of today's classrooms. We begin today with Jane Basnett, Director of Digital Learning, who joins me to unpack digital wellbeing and AI in education. We explore what digital wellbeing really means beyond the screen and how educators can recognise the signs of digital distress and why modelling healthy digital behaviours is essential. Jane also shares why empowering teachers with clarity and confidence is critical as AI becomes embedded in learning environments. Then I'm joined by Catherine Manure and Gemma Simpson from Hachette Learning Academy, where we focus on the future of professional development for teachers. We talk about the barriers educators face in accessing professional development and the shift towards online and adaptive learning models, how professionalised, flexible pathways can better support both classroom practices and teacher wellbeing. And finally, we have the wonderful Anna Bishkova, bringing us back to the foundations of learning through her work in EAL and oracy. We'll explore why speaking and listening are central to literacy, confidence, and inclusion, particularly for multilingual learners, and how small, intentional changes in teaching practices can lead to meaningful improvements in student outcomes. 3 conversation, 1 shared focus, rethinking how we support educators so they can support every learner now and in the future. So let's begin. Hello, Jane, and welcome to the EdTech Podcast. It is a delight to have you here. Would you be able to tell our international audiences a little bit about who you are and your background and what you currently do?
Absolutely. I'm delighted to be here, Philippa. So as you've said, I'm Jane Basnett. I am Director of Digital Learning at an all-girls school in Newbury, Downhouse. And I used to be a head of modern languages for a long time. I've been in teaching for over 30 years and I still love it. That's why I'm still here. And my role at the moment, Director of Digital Learning, and that means helping my colleagues use technology to enhance what they're doing in the classroom, to help students understand what they can do with it. And now, of course, with AI on the agenda, and there's a lot of work that we're doing in terms of how the best approach that we can have with AI.
Amazing. So AI is quite a significant kind of focus, would you say, at the moment?
Absolutely. We want to make sure we're doing it correctly. We want to make sure we're preparing our girls for their future, and that AI is going to be a massive part of their future, and we want them to feel comfortable using it, but also at the same time understand that their own thinking is still very, very important. And actually one of the things that we're looking at now is embedding AI in the curriculum so it can be used in a more natural way. So obviously we'll have some explicit lessons, but I think our focus is going to be much more on how can staff use AI in lessons so we can have those conversations about bias and ethics and hallucinations and so on. And then at the same time, we're looking at creating scales so that the students know, okay, for this piece of work, this is all my brain. it's not, AI is not allowed to be used in this. Other times we'll set tasks where, you're going to use AI, it's going to be a collaborator. So we're just looking at how we can embed that.
That's fantastic. And I've got a burning question right now while you're talking, because you sound so passionate. Can you tell the listeners, you're a teacher, what was your original sort of teaching background? Have you always been into digital learning? Is this kind of the role that you always meant to do? Or has this been something that's kind of been a bit of a curveball?
I am a career teacher. I actually found my old GCSE, sorry, no, not GCSE, I'm that old. I found my old O-level notes from my French preparation for my French oral, and the question was, what did I want to be? And I had written I wanted to be a teacher. I mean, at that point I didn't know which subject, but I've always wanted to teach, and I really enjoy being with young people, and I enjoy, it feels to me like a really worthwhile job. I feel like I can't think of anything more purposeful. So I think that answers the first part of the question. And when I started, I used overhead projector. Do you know that? And the acetates.
Yes.
I really hated it. I was rubbish at it because I wanted to do really fun stuff with it. I wanted to do, things that would really help them learn. And so I ended up with lots of cut up little bits, and I used to lose them everywhere, and it was a disaster. And then came the smart board, which I know gets a bad rap. Smart boards, nobody likes a smart board. They couldn't see the purpose of it. But I was able to use it. Really, I felt in a way that enhanced what was happening in the classroom. And the way I see myself now, because I am older, but I kind of joke about the fact that I'm riding the crest of a wave, like the AI wave. And I do see myself like that in terms of technology. I'm just very lucky that I caught the edge of the wave at the beginning of when technology started, and I've managed to stay up there and stay afloat. And at some point, I guess I'm going to fall off. Something's going to come along, and it's happening so rapidly now. But something's going to come along and I'll fall off, and then I'll know, okay, this role of digital lead is no longer for me. But at the moment, I'm keeping my balance.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. I think it's lovely to hear that kind of, very open-minded, very aware, but also kind of, this is the way it goes. This is a development. One of the things that I myself, being in digital learning as well, I was found a little bit easier for people to take as well. So you're not an IT lead because you're a modern foreign languages teacher. And actually that's quite reassuring for people, and that must be quite reassuring, because I know Hachette Learning have kindly asked you to create them a course, which I'd love to know a little bit more about. But actually, some of the listeners might even be more interested to hear that it's not coming from necessarily an IT perspective; it's coming from sort of different perspective, isn't it? Would you like to tell us a little bit about the course?
The course is it's about digital well-being, and it's kind of evidence informed. It's relying on everything that I've picked up over my years, and it's designed to help educators understand what digital well-being is, why it matters, how it can be cultivated in our school communities. It includes a whole load of things, reflective tasks, adaptive knowledge checks, and so on. And I guess what I've taken is everything through my career. I work in a school at Downhouse. We have one-to-one scenario environment, so I've seen firsthand examples of good digital habits, and I've seen the helpful things and the unhelpful things. Sometimes I walk past classrooms and I can see some good stuff going on, but there may be one or two girls who just can't, you might just think, look at something else, and so then we go away and we think, okay, how can we help them to stop looking, so we can obviously put things in place so that obviously their focus is on the classroom, but also about we have conversations about what's appropriate behavior and how we can avoid looking at the shopping sites or whatever. So it's like modeling healthy device routines and so on. And so that I've brought all of my experience, much as I can, into this wellbeing course for Hachette Learning.
That's amazing. And to tell me and other people, for those people who are not necessarily kind of sure of, it's quite a broad brushstroke, isn't it? Digital wellbeing. What does digital well-being mean? If I was taking your course and I kind of go digital well-being and I'm looking at it, what does that actually mean?
Well, I think it sort of encompasses quite a lot of things. It's a state of feeling balanced and safe when we're online, and capable when we're in all sorts of digital environments. And it's about self-regulation, looking at our habits, and looking at what's around us, if we're getting online, sort of that kind of persuasive technology piece with algorithms nudging us to have another look, and it's recognizing those things and managing those things. And also, I suppose, I shouldn't forget, there's the whole the peer impact, or parents, what messages are parents giving? And then, of course, what policies have we put in place at school to help manage digital well-being? And I think people often will think we're just talking about people being online too much, for example, looking at their screen too much. But it's not just about that. It's about what we're doing online that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big believer that screen time is only the passive consumption of something on a screen, whereas actually when we're in schools, we are learning with technology. We're looking at that screen because it's valuable. What misconceptions do educators have, or have you found that you've come across in education around digital well-being?
Well, obviously the screen time thing, one person's hour is very different to another person's hour. I can see that with my own two children, or they're in their teens now. But, for one, screen time was TikTok, scroll, Instagram, all that kind of stuff, really passive. And for the other one, it was all about creating and designing. And so it was a very different experience for them. I guess the other misconceptions are that young people are digital natives and digital immigrants. And I really don't go for that at all. And I never have. I think we're all digital foreigners when it comes to an app or a device, and we learn. Like when you go to any country, you learn about it. And that's how I think we need to perceive it. And I guess, those are the biggest areas. Thinking also, I guess, about the timing of the use. Are they looking at their devices really late at night? Are their phones near their beds? Yeah. How platforms are designed. There's some really, I remember reading, I don't remember the book, but it was about focus and how at one point when you got to the end of a screen, you had to then select to move on to another screen. Now we just scroll endlessly. It just goes on. And that was a conscious decision by the designers. It was a poor choice, really, because what it means is, an hour or two disappears before you realize that you've just been scrolling nonstop. And I'm just as bad. So I need to keep my phone away somewhere sometimes.
And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's one of the things that I was going to ask you about misconceptions, whether educators or perhaps even part of your course identifies that maybe we need to look to ourselves as well. And it isn't always the students or the young people who are the people who are consuming all of that. And as you mentioned, role modeling earlier.
Yep, absolutely right. It's about what we're doing in the classroom and the conversations that we can have. And I think being honest about problems that we might have in, oh my goodness, that rabbit hole that I went down into, and I just searched something on YouTube and there I was for ages, or on Instagram or whatever. And so having those conversations and modeling those healthy behaviors is really helpful in terms of guiding our students, and helping also in terms of, one of the things I do is teaching students to turn off their notifications. We don't want anything disturbing us when we're working. So putting on your do not disturb and modeling that behavior. And I don't have mine on. And I'm sometimes with colleagues, when I see it happening, I'm like, well, do you want me to show you how to turn it off? Because I want that message to be share. I just don't want them to be in their classroom and it pops up on the screen. We're not modeling what we want to see.
I would totally agree. I think a lot of the conversations that we're having with educators around digital screen time is are we the role model that we expect our children to be? There's an awful lot of phones and devices being removed from classrooms, but yet actually oftentimes the adults are still portraying the bad effect. And I guess that brings me to my next question, which is, why should conversations about digital well-being cover really more than just screen time? What are the other things that we need to be considering in those conversations with adults and children?
Well, I think we want to guide our students to understand what's happening to them when they're using technology. And we want to, we want to talk about digital literacy and well-being. We want to talk about it explicitly with the routines that we have. It shouldn't be an add-on. It's like part and parcel of everything. So even just, not walking around school holding our phones, looking at our devices, modeling all those healthy behaviors which we've talked about, and normalizing conversation about it, like the reflective dialogues that we might have about our digital habits, rather than sort of being punitive. I think it's much better to be open and to talk about, oh God, I really struggle with that. And one of the things I have to do is I have to actually put my phone in a different room. And actually now what I've got myself is is an alarm, for example, in the morning, so I don't have to rely on my phone, for example. To be fair, that's not quite what I do, but what I have done is I've got a watch that I can actually look at the time. So I used to have this scenario where I'd pick up my phone and have a look in the night, and that was just a terrible thing to do. And so I can talk about that and be honest about how I've managed that. And also, I suppose we want to talk about how do we get our students to consider the emotional impact of their digital interactions, and sometimes they might not know how to express that. So having those conversations to describe how those online spaces can make them feel, or they can see their friends are doing things and they're not involved, and doing all of this conversation in a really lovely, safe climate, safe environment, and building this culture of openness is really important. Perhaps we've made a digital mistake and we can dress it up in that way.
Absolutely. I think one of the things as I was listening to that there is it's amazing all these different things that we can do. It takes a lot of confidence for teachers to feel that they can have those. I often refer to digital learning when we're talking about digital literacy as a little bit like sex ed. People don't want to talk about it. And so as a teacher, to build that confidence, what kind of tips would you share with people who are starting off and kind of going, what we need to deal with our digital culture? They're going to come and do the course on Hachette Learning, and then they're going to go, right, how do I implement this? What sorts of things, how do you build that culture of openness and safety?
I guess it starts with getting the teachers, to recognize their own digital habits. And I think the course does that. The course asks these questions, these reflective questions, and it gives examples about how they can use reflective prompts in their classroom. How did this make you feel? How did this digital activity make you feel? How did today you stayed more focused? How did you get that? How did you reach there? Or perhaps, taking a step back, let's help you to be more focused. And the course looks at that, what can we do to help students be more focused? And getting students to map their routines, for example, would be one way to help them remain focused, identifying any patterns, any friction points in the day. And that's what the course focuses in on, and provides a whole load of little examples of things that they can do, sort of like traffic light systems, or posting where they feel, having like a temperature scale, and getting students, perhaps maybe this is more primary or key stage 3, they would look and say, okay, I'm feeling about here today. What are we doing here? We're modeling metacognition, so that they're thinking about what they're doing and they're managing their distractions. And so thinking about how we can help them think about these things and manage their distractions and regulate their own use. That's what teachers can do, and that's what I hope the course gives teachers that guidance there.
Yeah, which is a wonderful thing to be able to give someone as a skill, because actually that's a life skill forever, for them to be able to self-regulate and to take those little things down into smaller chunks and to be able to regulate themselves. And that can help support students across all sorts of areas, and actually adults as well. I think one thing would be really interesting to know is, from your experience, what are the sort of signs that students are under digital distress that maybe educators can start to spot? They can see, maybe they're observing things, and my assumption would be these would go under things like safeguarding risks. What sorts of things are you able to be able to help people with there?
I guess we would be looking as staff and as concerned adults at, whether a student is not focusing as well and their concentration isn't as good. They can't maintain focus. They're perhaps not doing tasks. They can't perhaps put their phone down. I think, probably some of this is something we might recognize in ourselves at times. Perhaps they're anxious. They're a little bit more anxious at times, anxious about the online activities or online interactions they've had. And I was trying to think of this morning about FOMO, the fear of missing out. I'm sure that wasn't a thing when I was a kid. Maybe it was, but FOMO is definitely something that is a thing for our young people today. And perhaps they don't like not being able to have their devices because they do worry they're going to miss out. And we might see a student who's constantly flicking from one tab to another, kind of multitasking and not doing any job very well. And I suppose the biggest thing is that the social clues, how their friendships going, are there issues, perhaps there's some signs of cyberbullying or, because they're becoming more introverted. And I think those signs, a child who is affected, I know it can be multiplied when the issue is online, but I think the signs are probably the same as they were, when I first started teaching with sort of face-to-face bullying. It's a similar thing. You would see a child who's withdrawn and upset, but now we have so many areas to be thinking about. It's not just, the interactions they have in the playground or in the classroom. It goes, these issues just follow them around everywhere. Can't get away from it.
No, and I guess that links back really into that whole digital well-being element of it, doesn't it? Is that if they are feeling that way every second of every day without that switch off that we may have been able to have when we were younger. And do you,
for sure,
with your girls at the school, is that something that you work into lessons and support and kind of how to deal with those emotions, but also those kind of scenarios when they see something or when they hear something or when something happens to them?
For sure, we have our PSHE, like Learning for Life. Those are the kind of conversations that they're having and that they discuss. And we're really lucky here in that we're boarding, and so they don't have their phones. Up to a certain age, they only have their phones for an hour a day, which I think is great. I mean, they have devices for learning in lessons. It is very refreshing to be walking through the school and, perhaps in the evening and they're playing bananagrams and things like that. So we've managed it in that way. But of course, they come to a time when they have to understand, when they have to learn to self-regulate. So, the phones, we allow them more time with their phones as they get older. But up to that point, they can have lots of lessons. And obviously, they've got their phones in the holidays. There are lots of lessons in Learning for Life, and also just the conversations in classroom, sort of embedding it through in the classroom with their tutor, for example, discussing their phone use and discussing either in the classroom or in that kind of one-to-one situation with the tutor about how using their device makes them feel, how they can stay in control, how, they can self-regulate. And it is something that we have to learn. I mean, in Australia, they've decided, as we know, to ban social media. And I don't know if that's the right thing because, when you ban something, it just makes it seem more exciting. Really, it's all about education, I think. And we try really hard to educate girls, and we have some really good open conversations with them about that. We had last year, one of the year teams organised a no phone at all for like 24 hours. Everybody had to hand it in. It was a good thing to do. It was like they didn't have to hand it in. If they wanted to take part, they could hand in their phone, which I think is helping to build some good habits.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's really nice for students to take that into their own hands and do that, because also there'll be a sense of kind of camaraderie with that, where students will feel, oh, okay, well, they're doing it. Okay, it might, I could do that as well. It'll feel a little bit more reassuring, especially when you consider things like FOMO. I guess it comes down to how comfortable and secure do people feel in that environment, right? And we hope that schools are able to all build that nurturing and open climate for schools that is safe, and that students feel that they can do those sorts of challenges and things together. I think one of the questions I would want to ask as well is, does the course help anyone in terms of the wider kind of group? So you've got your teachers, you've got students, or is that just something you hope might be an after effect, that it might flood out to the community in terms of these knowledge little nuggets about digital well-being?
I mean, the course is how hopefully looks at embedding good practice in terms of digital well-being in our communities, and those messages, hopefully teachers feel empowered to share the right messages with their school communities, with the other teachers, with their governors, with parents. Everyone needs to be on the same page for this to be successful. So we can do as much as we can with the students in the classroom, but if we can get our communities, if we can share that message with the communities that are directly involved with our pupils and our students, then that message is going to be that much more powerful and that much more successful. And I mean, it's the same as the sort of thing that we're doing with AI at the moment, the strategies and things that we're putting into place. It's only going to be successful if we've got our parents on board and they can see the same thing. If we've explained to them what it is that we want to achieve in terms of using, for example, AI, that we want our students to be thinking for themselves, but at the same time, we want them to learn how to prompt, but we want them to do their homework on their own. We don't want them to get AI to do it. I think that as long as we've explained all of that thoroughly to parents and they understand the pathway we've chosen, they will be on board. And I think the course gives lots of little ideas that could be shared with parents to help them be, that extra supportive pair of hands when the child is not in school, when the student's not in school.
Amazing. It just brings me as well on to, I know that recently we spoke to OpenAI ChatGPT around the work they're doing with universities. And they've brought a book out called 100 Chats because students are talking to them more. Do you see a correlation or a kind of increase in the use of AI around digital wellbeing? And what would be the things that you would sort of say are red flags or perhaps things that you would caution other educators around with that sort of scenario?
It's definitely true, that students are using AI and we do need to educate them. This is the very important role that we have now because we need to educate them to understand what is appropriate use. They need to understand, the things that we want them to understand is how AI can make AI systems make predictions and they reflect what it's been fed. So it may not always be objective. It has bias. There are risks in terms of bias and hallucinations, and it can oversimplify things. And, it will often be really positive depending on your question and your prompt. And so those are the lessons that we want to teach our students. We want them to understand that, you're going to it can almost be echo chamberish.
Yes.
You say something and if the question is loaded, it will come back to you. And so what we've got to encourage there is the ability to be critical. So those are really tough things to be teaching, but it's something that we can do in our lessons if we're using AI in an open kind of way, and we can then critique AI and we can have conversations about, is this good? What do we think about this data? Well, let's look at this response here. Is this representative of our classrooms? This is a very perhaps, white Anglo-Saxon response to this particular scenario. And it's highlighting these particular issues to the students. And so we need to have those discussions, embed those discussions about that bias and the ethics. And it's not, we must make sure it's not just in computing. It's got to be across all subjects, I think, because that makes it much more real. And I guess the positive way that AI could help would be to kind of reduce cognitive load sometimes, but then at the same time, we've got to watch out. It's a minefield. We've got to watch out because there'll be there's the algorithms doing its stuff. But if we can teach the students how to, this is a good use of AI. You could use it as a revision tool, for example, or perhaps, you've got a document with data and you actually need to just get it into, you can take a photo and you can transfer that information into Excel. So it's the conversations about what is good and what is bad. How do we get the best out of it? How do we make it work for us in a really positive way, but also understand the dangerous side of it?
That's incredible. I would like to ask you one final question, which is, what would you hope would be the biggest takeaway for educators from your course?
Good question. There's a lot in the course. So I hope the biggest takeaway is that they feel able to implement the things that they've learned in the course, that they're not alone, that there are lots of other people who feel the same way, may perhaps feel the same way as they do, in that, how do I broach this? And that's fine. The course will have plenty of ideas for them to embed in their classrooms. And I suppose that, that's the biggest takeaway, is that they can then help their students and perhaps help their colleagues and get the message spread through their whole communities.
Wonderful. It's brilliant. Jane, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. It's so nice to have someone who's so passionate and bubbly about their subject and their passions for what they do. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Hachette Learning Academy is a growing suite of interactive online CPD courses powered by adaptive technology, designed to bring the benefits of one-to-one coaching to every teacher. The Academy offers flexible, personalised professional learning that fits around busy schedules. Each course is built around a competency framework aligned with international teaching standards, helping educators strengthen the skills that drive effective teaching and lasting career growth. For more information, just visit www.hachetteLearning.com/academy.
Okay, so welcome Catherine and Gemma to the EdTech podcast. It is absolutely wonderful to have you here. Would you be able to start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself, Catherine?
Yes, so I have got a big background in education. I worked overseas in schools for about 25 years, and I've now joined Hachette Hachette Learning as of 3 years now, and I've been now working with professional development commissioning. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gemma.
Hi, Philippa. I'm Gemma Simpson. I'm Head of Product Management for Professional Development here at Hachette Learning. I've been with the organisation for around 17 years, and I've worked in the sort of educational publishing organisation. I've worked in the publishing sector for around 20 years on commissioning and product development for schools and colleges.
That's incredible. Now, both of you have very nicely mentioned the word professional development several times there. And that's because obviously Hachette Learning have also just recently launched their Learning Academy, which is a real game changer in terms of turning from being a publishing organisation into this new world of professional development for teachers and really expanding on that breadth of knowledge that you've got with authors and all these amazing subject matter experts. Just tell us a little bit about perhaps what are some of the struggles that today's teachers have been coming across when it comes to professional development and why that perhaps has kind of instigated the Hachette Learning Academy.
Yeah, so as part of the development of Hachette Learning Academy, we conducted a whole in-depth research programme into teachers' preferences for CPD, both in the UK and internationally. And I think one of the biggest challenges we identified with teachers accessing CPD, and this will come as no surprise to anyone in the education sector, is time. Their schedules are packed with teaching and planning, marking, administrative tasks, and it leaves very little room for professional learning. And when CPD is available, it often happens outside of school hours, which doesn't work for everyone. And, the days of getting off site for PD in the working day are long gone for many. And I think another challenge is relevance. So teachers want CPD that directly impacts their classroom practice and meets the needs of their students. And I think too often training can be generic or disconnected, and it makes it hard to apply in real life. And when you look across a school or more broadly across a school group or a school trust, the teaching staff have different experience levels, knowledge and skills caps. And we really feel that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to CPD. And of course, cost and accessibility are also major barriers. Many schools operate on tight budgets, so opportunities for high quality CPD can be limited. And then for teachers in rural or remote areas, location and travel adds another layer of difficulty to that sort of in-person CPD. And then finally, I think there's the issue of choice and autonomy. And teachers value having a say in their professional development, but sometimes CPD is mandated rather than tailored, which can reduce engagement and impact.
Yeah, and I would add to that having worked internationally, quite often a school will have teachers that have come to teaching from very different backgrounds. So you can get quite a disparity in levels of experience, and possibly if they're teaching UK curriculum, they may lack some of the knowledge and understanding of that. So these courses that we've developed are sort of aimed at helping bridge that gap and also sort of level people up so that they're all talking the same, so that they're all talking the same language in terms of their professional development within the school.
That is such an important part of it. Both of you have touched upon that fact that the flexibility, but also that personalisation. we know that from when we're teaching children that personalized learning has a greater impact. And I think you're right that the days of one size fits all professional development is no longer there. And this opportunity and breadth for people to have much deeper engagement with what they are really passionate around. And actually recently we've seen changes within legislation in the UK, haven't we? Where actually there's much more flexibility around being able to do your own professional development and that leading to your kind of next increment, etc., which really allows that flexibility for something like Hachette Learning Academy to be something that can be utilised by all, right?
Yes, no, absolutely. It's something that we've really thought about with the adaptive element as well of these courses, because teachers will come in with a starting point and kind of understand where they're at with their learning. And then from that, the adaptive element that we've introduced in these courses allows them to then follow a flow of learning that really matches where they are, their level of confidence, and the way the questioning is organised really draws them back. The adaptive element allows teachers who are perhaps less confident to take more time and gives them questioning that allows them to really dig deeper into the content of what they're learning and understanding. And if they're a little bit more confident, it will fast forward them and provide them with more enhanced type of questions that allow them to really dig deeper into extending their understanding and allow them to be a little bit more flexible with open-ended questions and guidance that will then help them to kind of assess whether they've really understood the content deeply or not. So, yeah.
That's brilliant. I think that's so important as well, because oftentimes we don't necessarily always know where we are with a certain subject or with a level. So that ability to be adaptive is really powerful as something that can engage professional development, sort of milestones for teachers to say, actually, that is something that I've managed to make progress in. And that's real tangible as well, evidence to be able to share with colleagues if required, or even just for their own professional development personally, which is wonderful. I think one thing that really interests me is obviously social media has kind of wildly grown and changed since even I became a teacher 15, 16 years ago. It's, something now we have a lot of teachers who share training and resources and things like that. So there's definitely a shift. But have you noticed a shift from teachers gaining all their insights from books, where we would traditionally, when we did our university courses, there's lots of these gorgeous books from incredible people, to more interactions due to social media and other dynamic methods of online training?
Absolutely. I think there's been a huge shift. And in the past, teachers obviously relied heavily on books and printed materials for their professional insights. And, while these resources, of course, are still valuable, and, we continue to publish through Hachette Learning professional development publications, and we believe there continues to be a place for that more detailed look into particular strategies or ideas in that format. Today's educators are increasingly turning to social media and on other online platforms as well. And I think social media has created that really vibrant professional learning community where teachers can share ideas and ask questions and get instant feedback. Platforms like X or Blue Sky, LinkedIn, and even TikTok have become spaces for bite-sized tips and innovative strategies. And, many of the educators that we work with are an integral part of those communities. And I think that real-time exchange of ideas is something books simply can't offer. And we know teachers really value that, and they want to reflect on ideas and discuss how to apply them in their own context and reflect on some of the strategies that they've implemented in the classroom and what's worked and what hasn't. The shift's clear from solitary reading to a more interactive, community-driven type way of learning. It's faster, it's more personalised, and it's more inspiring. But I think all of those interactions, regardless of the format that they're in, can really enhance the impact of PD. And I think they work hand in hand together.
Yeah, it feels a bit like an additional book club, kind of taking it from that individual, like you say, solitary reading to that kind of book club where you all have to get together. But now there's this ability to have a book club at any time, anywhere. And then obviously, as Hachette Learning have continued to do, is build onto that ability to have this kind of on-demand learning. Catherine, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, we've lent as well into the fact that we've got so many great authors who've worked with us in other publications. So we've really tried to draw on that. And many of them have got a huge following. And so people are quite excited to see courses that are an extension of their books or their webinars or things that they're perhaps talking about on these social platforms, LinkedIn, for example. And so there's this whole discussion that's going, and then people can come and see these resources and see these authors in a slightly different context. I know our authors are really passionate about what they're doing, so they're really keen to also see their material in different ways and imagine it in different ways. So it's been a really interesting. We've obviously brought in authors perhaps who are less well known, but then that's with the idea that perhaps that will also kind of work backwards in their favour, and they'll become more well known in other areas and perhaps do publications. So there's a large crossover with the professional development offer that we have. And it's really exciting to see that working.
That's amazing. And I think you're right, because so many people all around the world have some incredible knowledge from all these places that, you know, we perhaps have never visited or never had the opportunity to experience, haven't they? And just because they're not as well known, that's offering them a pedestal to say, this is also a really interesting part of that topic. I think that's really lovely. And so it brings me to kind of a question, really, that what do you think teachers get out of online PD these days? I know we've touched upon a few bits, but what are those key benefits?
I think it's flexibility above all else. They can learn at their own pace, fit their training around their own schedules, and revisit content whenever they need to. And that's a huge advantage compared to that traditional face-to-face session that requires time out of the classroom. And we've just touched on this, but I think the other big benefit is access to that wide range of resources and expertise that, you know, online PD can open doors to global communities and subject specialist innovative practices that you might not have available to you locally. And teachers can connect and share ideas and learn from peers beyond their own school or even beyond their own region. And I think in Hachette Learning Academy, as Catherine said, we're really pleased to be offering courses written by a wide range of educational experts and grounded in that academic research. And then the other element is obviously the personalisation. So teachers and schools can choose courses that match their interests, their own individual needs or strategic goals, rather than sitting through those generic sessions. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing that we're offering with Hachette Learning Academy. Each course can provide a personalised pathway powered by that adaptive learning technology. So individuals can progress through the course at their own pace that's relevant to their own prior experience and knowledge and based on their individual confidence levels.
Yeah, I would say added to that, the idea of the low stakes. And as you mentioned, some of the areas that schools are now having to face, the digital literacy, for example, or even well-being on the back of what's been, that's happened in recent years, allows teachers to come in and do it at their own level of confidence. It's low stakes. There's no one's going to be asking them why they don't know this. They can go at their own pace and really understand what the new content is about. I would add it's also that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I remember my journey as a teacher. I'd actually changed careers, and when I became a teacher just after my PGCE year, I was, and I would say, very fortunate to have my first little baby, but it meant sleepless nights, and when I was at school, I was exhausted and, taking part in really long PD sessions. The idea of having adaptive professional development would have been a dream at that point in time, where, I wasn't having to try and squeeze it in after school or worrying about getting back to him and all those different things. I could have done it, when he was finally in bed at night, that evening when I would do a lot of my work and my marking. So I think it's a really brilliant shift, because really, how might adaptive online professional development like this as a whole help teacher wellbeing?
Yeah, we know that teacher wellbeing is a huge issue facing the teaching profession. And I think managing it effectively can avert some of those recruitment and retention challenges that we're seeing in the sector, and also kind of protect teacher mental health. And I think these adaptive online learning solutions can play a huge role in supporting teacher wellbeing, because it removes a lot of the stress and the rigidity that traditional PD brings. Like you were just saying, Philippa, they can fit it around their own life needs. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It personalises the experience, so teachers can focus on what's most relevant to their subject or their classroom challenges and their own personal career goals. And I think that sense of control and autonomy is empowering, and it kind of reduces some of the frustration that then leads to stress. And it can also help with time management. Teachers can learn in sort of short, manageable chunks at times that suit them, rather than sacrificing their evenings or weekends for long sessions. And that flexibility means professional growth doesn't come at the expense of their personal time. And then we've talked quite a lot about confidence. And I think when CPD adapts to teachers' progress, it avoids overwhelming them with content that they don't need, and instead builds on their own strengths, and that can create a more positive learning experience.
Yeah, and I would also add to that whilst these courses are online and they're done individually, we've heard from many teachers that they've taken some of the content and some of the ideas outside of this, and it's kind of led to conversations within their staff room on these key topics. So we don't want to undermine the fact that we know teachers love to talk to each other about these topics, and we're very conscious that if a school were to do these courses, they might well take a moment in their staff meetings to actually talk about some of this face to face with one another and actually have a conversation about them. So the combination of those two create quite a powerful professional development tool, we think.
That's amazing. I feel like Hachette Learning Academy has really sort of taken those elements that we are trying to adapt into our classrooms about not overwhelming, not overloading cognitively, allowing that metacognition prompts to be able to allow mastery of learning and really to be able to draw into some of these aspects. So I guess a final question to you both would be, what are your hopes for the next stage of Hachette Learning Academy? Now it's live and things are being released to teachers. What's next?
Yeah. Well, we're really excited to have launched the first tranche of courses, and we've had some really positive responses to trialling in pilot schools and from early adopters. And we're launching further courses throughout next year. And these are all built around our teaching competencies framework, which is designed to support in-demand contemporary skills and align with national teaching standards and other recognised frameworks. So I think our ambition is to broaden our course offer into each of those competency areas, beginning with topics such as adaptive teaching and inclusion. And we've got digital wellbeing, climate education, to name a few, coming next year. And we hope to evolve the solution to meet the ongoing needs of educators, and believe that it will really provide schools with a structured way to plan for staff growth in a way that's consistent and scalable and meets individual needs.
Yes, and at the moment, the courses that we're offering are mostly not phase specific and subject specific. So we would hope to grow that and definitely respond to some of the changes in the curriculum reviews, for example, the writing framework. And we're also offering quite a lot on Send because we've seen that that's a real need. As we develop this product further, we're hoping to be able to develop a suite of courses for leaders, middle leaders and senior leaders in school that kind of builds on some of the best practice. And many of the authors that have done the courses for us, for the class teachers, are all geared up to support us with that, because many of them, that's also their area of expertise. So yeah, that's how we hope to move forward. And we're also hoping to create a framework which will be for leaders as well, so which will build on the competency framework that we've got for class teachers.
That is incredible. It's not a little bit, it's quite a lot, isn't it? Going to be very busy people. Well, that is absolutely incredible. It's been really wonderful to speak to both of you, and it's been really interesting to see how the future of professional development is really changing. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Anna, and welcome to the EdTech podcast. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your career and your background, including what your current role is and what you're focusing on at the moment?
Hello, thank you for having me on your podcast. So yes, my name is Anna, and I've been working internationally for about 18 years now. My background is in English language teaching. I'm a qualified teacher in my country, and I specialized back in my country, in my QTS, I specialized in teaching English as a foreign language. And then for many years, I was working for such major players in EFL as International House and British Council, in different positions like academic manager, teacher trainer, and teacher, obviously. And then about 8 years ago, I switched to the world of international school teaching. And so I'm currently working for one of the international schools in Thailand, and I am an EAL lead for primary and secondary.
Incredible. What an amazing amount of experience you've had. One question for our audience, as we are totally international. Can you just explain what EL is?
Of course. Yes, EAL stands for Teaching English as an Additional Language. And this acronym, actually, there are different ways of expressing the same. I think at the moment in Britain, EAL is used. In America, I think they used to use ELL, English Language Learners. But I think now a lot of us are switching to using the word multilingual learners to clarify that we're talking about students who are joining mainstream education and who would like to be able to study in the mainstream, study at school, study at universities, even though their language still needs a little bit, English language, I mean, still needs a little bit support to help them access the curriculum that they learn comfortably. So EAL, ELL, multilingual learners, all of that stands for the support that is provided to learners who need to improve their language just a bit to be able to study comfortably in English.
That's incredible. And I think multi-language learners is something that we're using in the Middle East quite a lot, because we are finding that actually our students do have more than just the one language. So actually that can either be an absolute benefit because it allows them to pick up the language a lot quicker, but also it can be a real barrier because they have so many languages they're trying to learn from such a young age that really does sort of put some barriers in the way for them, doesn't it? And so tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing at the moment.
Well, at the moment in my school, as I mentioned, I'm an EEL lead, and particularly this year, what I would really like to focus on is to try to promote the notion that the support for multilingual learners or EEL learners is not just the remit of the EAL department, that we all need to chip in. We all need to try harder to ensure that our students can access curriculum in any in any lesson that they attend. And so we've been trying to promote various strategies, EFL strategies, ELT strategies, to make sure that they're used in homeroom classrooms, in mainstream classrooms. And that's my interest in oracy, because we would like our teachers, all of them, to try to ensure that in every single lesson that our students attend and every single subject that they study, they're exposed to good examples of how teachers can help them improve their oral abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, ultimately, in every lesson, we're expecting children to talk, aren't we? And to understand, to be able to grasp those concepts that we're teaching them is a big part of that, is them being able to describe and refer back to and have those back and forth conversations around the discussion topics, or potentially even just to show mastery and thought processes in different ways. So what is oracy as a kind of whole concept, and why does it matter?
Well, oracy is such a really crucial ability, because if you think about it, we just have to use our speaking abilities. We have to use speaking every single day of our life, and very frequently as well. Normally, we use it for interactional reasons, to establish relationships with people, but also for transactional reasons. It means that we need to convey or exchange information with others, basically to get what we want in life. For example, I need to buy some gas, so I go to a gas station and engage in a conversation to get petrol for my car. And if you're not able to express yourself clearly or with motivation, with clarity, or if you're not able to be appropriate in a range of different situations in life, this might actually mean that you won't be able to go ahead in life successfully, because your chances of getting what you want in life will be significantly hampered. It means you might not, if you are not a good speaker, then it means you might not go ahead in education, in career, even in your personal life. And that's why when we talk about the need to develop oracy, we understand that really, if you want to succeed in any walk of life, if you want to be a healthy and a happy person, you need to be able to express yourself orally. So that's on the one hand. So oracy is such a major skill, such an important skill, but also it is such a complex skill. And I think for a long time, we just took it for granted. We thought, well, oracy will just take care of itself, right? Speaking will, precisely because we have to engage in it every single day of our life. But then soon we started to realize that, yes, perhaps we will all develop basic oracy up to a certain extent. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we will be able to use just those basic general oral skills, for example, to complete certain tasks in education or at work, because there are specific situations we need to engage in, which require a different level or a different approach to using speaking. Oracy is a really complex skill, as I mentioned previously. For example, if you look at the Oracy 21 framework, they talk about how in order for you to be a successful speaker, you need to activate certain physical abilities, for example, varying your kind of voice pitch. You also need to show certain cognitive abilities, for example, the ability to structure your talk. There are all obviously linguistic or kind of language underlying abilities involved, because you need to choose specific words to convey the specific message you need to convey. And of course, there are social emotional underlying abilities. For example, finding the right words to communicate with a person depending on what kind of mood that person is or what kind of attitude he has to the conversation. And all of that has to be used at the same time, simultaneously. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially for students, for
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when, maybe it could be something that becomes a barrier because of their confidence as well. And you just don't know, shy children and children who maybe aren't speaking English for this instance at home, and actually that makes such a difference to the grounding that everybody has. And if they can see confidence across the board. Really interestingly, you mentioned oracy framework for 21 framework. But it has been around for a really long time before that, hasn't it? So why do you think it's been brought to the forefront so much now?
Well, my personal opinion is that it's because we are understanding now, we are seeing now that if we want our students' literacy skills to be good, we have to invest into oracy. Because the premise of our education, I think we love literacy, right? We love teaching literacy because it's very concrete. There are a lot of activities, you can do. I think our whole teacher training works towards training our teachers how to develop reading and writing. There's the science of reading, right? The science of writing. It's more practical. It's easier to explain. But I think a lot of it was based on the premise that the children we are teaching to read and write already have the ability to express their ideas orally. And we all know that it's not really possible to go ahead and write something if you're not able to first express or talk about what you're going to write. It's actually really, really challenging. Just a very basic example, when I was preparing for this interview and I was making notes, I constantly had this sort of kind of inner monologue quietly running in the background because I was trying to verbalize my ideas, trying to check whether they sound, kind of logical, and only then I would be typing them up. And I think now we are realizing that with the student population we now have all around the world, because of various reasons like, migration, different kind of wars, etc., we're getting students whose oral abilities need some support if we want also to support their literacy. And I think the more we're seeing this connection, the more we're willing to invest into developing oral skills, because we simply now understand that it's not possible to start running before you can walk. They have to walk first and they have to speak first. And only then they will be able to write.
Absolutely. It's really important, isn't it? Especially when you break it down like that, actually, it's some of those fundamental skills. And I remember reading a lot during COVID and after COVID around the effects. I did a big piece of work for digital learning and it was actually a guide for parents, the understanding the importance of right from birth, making sure that they weren't distracted too much by technology, because actually even the babbling phase, those kind of first formations of words and that eye contact and them seeing your mouth move and all those different things, they all start to shape oracy, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this, yeah. Kind of, I think we happily forgot about COVID, but COVID hasn't forgotten about us. I think, that generation of children who were really not exposed to, like you said, the diverse mouth movements, which they would have been exposed to if they, had a chance to go outside to different playgrounds and shopping malls, etc., being given a chance to interact with different people. They missed out on all of that. And I think, actually, I don't know how much research has been done into what exactly the impact of that is. But obviously, I think, you don't have to be a scientist to realize that a decline in oracy will have something to do with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. And so really that's kind of brought you on to obviously Hachette Learning Academy. You've now created a course for them. So tell us a little bit about that and about what does what does the course go into in terms of oracy?
Yeah, when I was asked to create a course, I was really just thinking about what would help me as a teaching practitioner in my job. And then basically kind of once I had that clear in my head, I went ahead and created this course. And I started by establishing the need, what we just talked about, why oracy is important. Because I think for many educators, I wouldn't say there's still a doubt about that, but I don't think the urgency is there. That's what I mean. Like, we all know we need to try to invest more time into developing oracy, but perhaps this is never really a priority in some context. So yeah, I started in this course by establishing the need, explaining what oracy is, why it is such a crucial skill, everything we've just spoken about. Then from that, I moved on to general oracy. In this part of the course, I try to draw on my experience as an EFL teacher, because, in EFL, we spend a lot of time working with beginner learners who haven't had much exposure to, for example, English outside of their schools or language centers. So very often we really have to start from scratch, developing their oral abilities. So I try to draw on that expertise. And in part 2, we talked, for example, about what it means to be a good speaker, and how speaking is different from writing. Why might students find speaking in a different language challenging, and what we can do to overcome those challenges. We also talked about what makes a speaking activity universally good for students who are learning to speak. We also talked a little bit about error correction and assessment of oral abilities, and how, for example, accuracy and fluency can be the 2 factors you need to consider when designing and assessing speaking tasks. Then in the third part of the course, we moved on to speaking more in terms of academic contexts. As I mentioned previously, oracy that we use in general social situations will be different from the oracy that we need to demonstrate at schools and at universities, because there are very specific academic genres, academic situations we need to engage in. And that's why in part 3, we looked at how all those basic principles of general oracy could be, of course, applied to academic oracy, but there are certain things that we need to take into account. Like, for example, specific language functions, academic language functions we need to develop, or the fact that we always need to make sure that on the one hand, we help our students develop their speaking skills, but on the other hand, we need to help them show their academic knowledge through speaking. That's the basic outline of the course.
Amazing. And I assume it goes into the different elements of oracy as a crucial skill. So tell us a little bit about those kind of levels.
Do you mean the cognitive or?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how those different elements kind of all align together to allow somebody to have sort of fluency within their oral ability.
Well, I think if you want somebody to start speaking, certain things need to happen. Well, first of all, you need to make sure that people have enough ideas for speaking. That's one thing which is very, very crucial, because if somebody thinks they don't have enough ideas, then, they won't be able to engage in speaking or want to speak. So that's one level that you need to kind of work on. And that's for example, the linguistic kind of part of the oracy abilities. Then the second one is that we need to make sure that our students actually have the language to start speaking, because they might have brilliant ideas, but they're all encoded in their primary languages. If they don't have the English kind of resource to express them, then again, they won't really want to engage in speaking. We also need to ensure that people really feel comfortable and not shy. So we need to motivate them, create very motivating activities in which they will feel that their contributions are welcome. So essentially, I think if you create an opportunity for your students to have enough ideas for speaking and to have enough language for speaking, that they feel comfortable and they have had enough time to prepare, then naturally, usually speaking will be developed. And while you design speaking activities, that's when you can really try to focus on the aspects that are most kind of relevant to the task at hand. For example, if you think you need to look into the physical aspects of oracy, for example, for presentations, looking at how you need to project your voice, where you need to stand and present yourself, then you will be focusing more on this. If, for example, in a speaking activity, the clarity of presentation is very important and the quality of the language is very important, then you will be building your preparation stages for speaking around that, and so on and so forth.
Amazing. And those elements especially are so vital these days. I think, that idea of so much technology can do for us, thinking about bringing it into schools, bringing it into educators' mindsets. What are some of the barriers that students face when they're developing their confidence? And how might educators adjust their own mindsets to kind of support students in that? Or maybe even just that awareness. Perhaps your course also helps with that.
Well, I think with barriers that students might face in developing confidence in speaking, I think kind of we just dwelled on some of them previously, right? You need to make sure that there are enough ideas, there is enough language, and there is enough time for students to prepare. And in my experience, usually if you have those three covered, if the task is engaging, if the language has been provided, and if the ideas have been thought about, then usually students will be more willing to try to speak. In terms of the use of English, there is another challenge sometimes, especially for students who are just learning to speak English. They often try to, maybe they don't always feel the need to use English in class, because perhaps there's a group of students who share who have a similar linguistic background. So here again, it all boils down to how creative you are as a teacher, trying to motivate students, maybe creating language partners or using some sort of methods, like carrot and stick methods, whatever, kind of your favorite repertoire of those techniques is. In terms of how might educators actually adjust their mindset to support these students, I think it's just thinking about the fact that this is not a luxury anymore. This is not something we can do if suddenly we have a little bit of time on our hands during the lesson, because this is not about purposeful planning. This is just kind of some sort of ad hoc solution that teachers might be finding on the spot. Okay, well, let's throw in a little bit of speaking if we have a little bit of time. We need to be much more purposeful about it, about planning speaking activities, about understanding how exactly we are going to develop skills as opposed to just practicing them, and how we are going to assess that the progress has been made. And I think this is the most important thing for us to deal with at the moment. Is I think we need maybe the support from the management of different schools and educational institutions to ensure that some time is given to us to start planning those activities more purposefully. And I think, honestly, looking at my experience, I think the best way to motivate educators to actually try to do it more is to somehow get them to do it. And once they see the brilliant outcomes of how important oracy is and how much it impacts everything else, academic attainment, literacy development, I think once they see what wonderful outcomes oracy can bring to the lives of their students and to the learning process and teaching process, I think then they will be sold.
I can imagine. And the thing is, sometimes it takes that support, doesn't it, to be able to embed them. I know that when I was working in a secondary school in the UK, it was brought in during one of the first terms that I worked in this school. This was going back 11 years or so ago now, and it had a huge impact. And one of the things that we would do would be choral reading, and we would have every single student at one of our lessons every week. We would make everybody stand up, and the focus of that was that those higher ability kind of oracy students or people who had more fluency could then also bring them up because of the rhythm and the patterns in which that kind of worked. And so I'd love to hear just maybe a couple of really great things that over your career you've been able to find have been successful that maybe, people who are listening could take and plant into their lessons and their days.
Well, I mean, I think it's always good to just have a bank of go-to speaking activities that you can that they're so universal and so sort of generic that you can easily embed them into any subject. For example, in EFL, we often talk about the information gap activities. I think they're also called the barrier gains activities in some contexts. But essentially, you need to create a reason to talk, right? So when there is an information gap, students will have this reason because they need to exchange this information. For example, a very classical example would be, I don't know, you are given a picture in an art lesson. For example, one student is given a picture and then the other student is given a picture which is slightly different, and they have to talk to each other without looking at the picture, trying to describe the picture in as much detail as possible and try to find, for example, 5 differences. And here you go, here you have this kind of focus on the clarity of speech combined with using the right language, the right descriptive language. And there is this game-like element. For example, which pair is able to find those 5 differences first? Yeah, to make it even like more interesting with the primary students, you can put them back to back. So they're sitting, for example, on the floor with their backs to each other, just to make it even more fun. Another classic example of an information gap activity would be something like, for example, you have to read a story, but you're all given different parts of the story. And for example, in order to find a person who committed a crime, you all have to read your part of the story and then retell it in a lot of detail to the partner so that you can all listen to each other and try to figure out what the whole story is about to answer the question. Those kinds of activities are quite easy to arrange. And like I said, they can be modified very easily by putting in the content, which is more subject related.
That's incredible. I think that's so interesting to be able to kind of, most of those as well, I feel could be of any age, because obviously we do have to remember that so many of our students who are EAL often come to us in secondary or even, at university level. So I guess just to find, kind of bring everything to a close, it would be amazing to hear some of those positive impacts that you've seen over the years from helping students and young people improve their listening and speaking skills.
Well, I think for me, just wanted to give you an example, which I actually just described recently in my LinkedIn post. I was doing this, again, very kind of common EFL activity, which was called the pyramid discussion. You know, when you have a topic to discuss and you need to agree on something, but first you do it in pairs and you have to present your idea and convince the other person. But then you have to agree on something together as a pair, and then you get 2 pairs together and you have to do exactly the same, but working as a group of 4. Again, agreeing on something, trying to convince each other. And then you're doing exactly the same, but you're doing it as a whole class. So the idea is that as a whole class, you need to agree on one point or, kind of a list of things, for example. And, like I've always, I thought when I was introducing this activity, I thought, well, my students probably, they're teenagers as well. They'll probably get bored. They will say something like, oh, Miss Anna, why do we have to repeat things again and again? But then each time they repeated things, I would also stop the activity and I would actually provide more advanced language to them. So, for example, instead of if somebody said, oh, I want to drink, I would say, well, did you want to say thirsty? And we would write everything on the board. And then I was just surprised how much they wanted to actually repeat what they've said using this new advanced language, because they felt that their speaking was elevated. It was becoming better each time they had a go. And I think for me, this showed how much actually our students want to be better speakers, how much they're willing to try, and how much these kinds of activities can actually engage and motivate them to improve. That's one aspect of it. But for me, probably, as I mentioned previously, probably the biggest, honestly, the best outcome is that my students started writing much, much better. I teach several groups. I teach the same content to several groups. And with one group, unfortunately, I did not have a lot of kind of time to actually get them to speak about their writing before they did that. I didn't have a chance for them. I didn't give them a chance to talk to each other about the topic. We just went into writing, and we did that writing for probably 30 minutes, and the outcomes were still quite minimal, I felt. And then the next day I was teaching a different group, but the same lesson. And I actually did stop myself. And I asked my students to brainstorm the ideas first, and then they discussed them in pairs. Then they turned to a different partner and they presented their ideas. And again, they got more feedback from their partners. And after that writing that took 30 minutes for my previous group, it only took 15 minutes for the second group to complete. And it was so much better. Everybody felt so confident. Like I said, they had the ideas, they had the language because I was able to feed it in during the oral stage. They had the time to prepare. They didn't feel they were rushed anymore because the preparation stage was longer. And when those three factors, the ideas, the language, and the time all got together, the actual writing outcome was so much better. And again, I felt like my students enjoyed the whole process so much more. So for me, this connection between oracy and literacy, it is so kind of complete. It is so essential, and it is so positive that I think we just need to recognize it and try to build in this connection into our lessons a bit more.
That is amazing. How wonderful. And such, like you say, such simple ideas and activities that have such a big impact when you change some very small things about something that you may be, a teacher may think, well, I've been doing that same thing for years. Actually, that's something really easy for me to add into my lesson to be able to have that kind of impact. And I guess just one final question or thought would be, from your course with Hachette Learning Academy, what do you hope people will feel after they've done the course? What do you hope that they will be able to find and have as takeaways from the course?
Well, as you said, it's the small tweaks, right? Kind of our course is all about giving our course participants those small tweaks, that bank of universal speaking activities that can be just applied in every subject. So I'm hoping that after the course is completed, educators will go ahead and try to make use of those templates or those tips and tricks straight away, and they will feel that that enhancing oracy is not really a mammoth task. It's a task that everybody can cope with, taking it step by step every single day, introducing minor changes. In fact, I think, I actually was thinking about it quite recently. When we are asked, well, how can we introduce more opportunities? How can we build in more opportunities to develop oracy into our lessons, into our curricula? I actually think that opportunities are there. They're always there as these sort of constant placeholders. It's just that we almost not see them. We brush them away because the kind of the priority is on literacy. But actually, if we stopped for a second and just said, oh, okay, yeah, of course, we use this think, pair, share activity all the time, right? Why don't we just explore it a little bit more and building the language development or specific on speaking skills development? Why don't we just take a second to explore this opportunity a bit more? I think speaking is just so natural for us that it's embedded in everything. We just don't maybe always see those opportunities, but we need to seize the day. We just need to stop, give ourselves a moment and see if we can extend those opportunities a little bit to help our students.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Anna, for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. And we're really looking forward to your course coming out from Hachette Learning Academy. How can people connect with you if they want to know more?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Across these three conversations, a clear message emerges. Effective professional learning is purposeful, human, and deeply connected to the realities of teaching today. From Jane's insights into digital wellbeing and responsible AI use to Catherine and Gemma's work on flexible, adaptive professional development. And Anna's focus on oracy as a foundation for inclusion and literacy. This episode highlights how impact often comes from clarity, not complexity. Whether it's supporting teacher confidence around technology, designing professional development that fits real lives, or creating more space for student voice in the classroom, these conversations remind us that meaningful change is both possible and practical. You'll find links to all our guests and their work in the show notes. And if this episode has sparked ideas or reflection, do share it with a colleague or your wider learning community. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the EdTech Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, rate, and share the EdTech Podcast wherever you're listening. It really helps us grow and reach more educators and innovators around the world. We'd also love to hear from you, your thoughts, questions, or even your own stories of change in education. You can leave us a voice note on SpeakPipe. The link is in the show notes. And we might even feature your message in an upcoming episode. And of course, you can find all our links and show notes and resources at theedtechpodcast.com.